There is a theory about where monsters come from, not from outside the walls, from whoever walked through the door. In the beginning, a single image. A dimly lit room with yellow wallpaper and a carpet that went nowhere. Someone posted it online with a caption that read, "If you are not careful, you can not clip out of reality." The concept spread slowly at first, the way quiet things do. Then it became something larger. A mythology built entirely by strangers who had never met, all agreeing instinctively that this place felt real. A young filmmaker began producing short videos about this space, shot in found footage style, deliberately low budget and specific. The videos were unsettling in a way that was hard to name, not because of what they showed, but because of what they implied. The rules of the space were never explained. The dread came from watching someone navigate them anyway. The series became one of the most closely analysed pieces of internet horror ever made. A furniture store, a basement door. A man steps through, and the life he knew ends in a single step. The movie begins with an ordinary situation. A man named Clark runs a furniture showroom. Something in the basement is draining power. He goes to investigate. The door he finds does not lead to a utility room. It opens onto something else entirely. A place that is wrong in a way that takes a few seconds to process. Warm fluorescent light. Carpet that has no reason to be there. Hallways that have no end. Online fan communities began dissecting the film from the first weekend. Frame by frame analyses. Discussion thread after thread, each one building on the last. What are the entities? Where do they come from? What does the ending mean? What is the space actually doing? The debates ran for weeks. Most questions had no official answer. The director said this was intentional. The space belongs to everyone, and so do the theories. 5 theories emerged from those threads that gathered the most sustained attention. Not fringe speculation. Detailed analyses backed by specific moments in the film, but collectively form a coherent picture of what the space might actually be. They do not agree on everything. But taken together, they raise a question that the movie appears to be asking on purpose. What if the space is not the real horror? What if you brought it with you? The first theory begins with a question. Why is Clark's zone full of furniture from a life he left behind? Clark's section of the space is filled with objects from his waking life. Sofas, tables, chairs arranged in configurations that do not make sense. The furniture is not random. It is his inventory, the showroom brought inside. Fans noticed this early and began building an explanation around it. The space does not generate its own contents. It uses what it finds in the mind of whoever opened the door. It populates itself from memory. The entities are built the same way. Each figure inside Clark's zone corresponds to someone from his past. A chair lamp figure, barely assembled, barely functional. A bearded shape that drifts without purpose. A form draped in red fabric that moves with more intent. None of them are the original people. They are what the space managed to construct from fragments of memory. The quality of the copy depends entirely on the intensity of what you remember. The red-draped entity is the most developed, more present, more unsettling. The theory argues this is because Clark cannot stop thinking about her. She is his ex-wife, someone he resents deeply, someone he returns to in thought constantly. The space reads this and builds accordingly. The longer you carry a memory, the sharper the replica. The things you cannot let go of are the things it renders most clearly. The chair lamp figure, by contrast, is crude, barely recognizable as something that was once human. Fans' theory is this is a memory Clark barely holds, a peripheral person from his past vaguely recalled. The space tried to build it and ran out of material, hollow in the middle, sluggish, unable to sustain presence. Thin memories make thin copies. The space works with what it is given. This also explains the geography. Clark's section does not look like the generic empty corridors of popular mythology. It looks like a distorted extension of his life, his inventory, his relationships, his regrets, rendered in a space with no natural light and no visible exits. The more you understand Clark, the more you understand where he is trapped. It is a portrait of his mind, built in yellow-lit carpeted rooms. The space does not choose what it becomes. The person who enters chooses, they just don't know they're doing it. This theory also offers an explanation for why the mythology has always felt so personal to people who encounter it. The yellow wallpaper, the humming fluorescent lights, these are not random design choices. They are the specific textures of institutional spaces from a particular era of the 20th century, which occupy a shared cultural memory. When someone knocklips, they bring that shared memory with them. The space can only work with what it has. It is, at its core, a system of retrieval. There is a moment in the film where Clark invites two other people inside. They enter the space, and within a short time, new things appear in the surrounding zones that were not there before. Not furniture, not geography. Something that corresponds to a relationship in one of their lives. The space updated itself. New memories had arrived, and it began incorporating them immediately. It does not wait. It builds in real time from whatever it is brought through the door. What this theory implies about the entities themselves is deeply uncomfortable. They are not monsters in the traditional sense. They are grief and obsession rendered physical. They are the people you cannot stop thinking about, stripped of context and animated by something with no interest in being accurate. The entity built to resemble someone you once loved is not them. It is what you remember of them, distorted through years of unresolved feeling. That is what is walking towards you. Fans noted that this reframes the entire question of danger inside the space. The things most likely to hurt you are not random entities. They are the memories you have been carrying the longest, the most emotionally charged, the least processed, the deepest buried. The space has been studying you through your proximity to the entrance, building from what it can sense of your interior life. And the most dangerous thing in your zone is you. Everything that chases you in there came from somewhere inside, before you ever took a single step. The second theory begins with a mural, written in large letters on a wall deep inside the space. Somewhere in Clark's zone, on a wall covered in his own markings and diagrams, there is a phrase written in large letters. Tablets don't bleed blood. An arrow points to a group of figures burned into the floor, figures that resemble the standard entities of the space. Clark had figured something out. He understood that the thing following him was fundamentally different from the hollow copies scattered throughout his zone. He put it on the wall so he would not forget. The standard entities, what fans call the still lifes, have a consistent anatomy. Their interiors are pale and spongy, resembling a fungal or fibrous material. When they are cut or broken, what comes out is not blood. It is a dense, white, foamy substance. They do not have bones. They do not have a skeleton. They are assembled structures, built from the space's interpretation of the human shape, without the biological architecture that holds a real body together. The entity known as Captain Clark is different. When Mary fights it, it bleeds, actually bleeds. Red dark, physical. In a late scene, X-ray images of this entity are visible on a medical screen. The skeletal structure is wrong. Too many ribs, compressed where they should not be, a brain casing far too small. But the skeleton exists. This is a being with bones and blood and a body built on a recognizably biological plan. The fan theory, drawing on these observations, argues that Captain Clark is not a still life at all. It is something else. Something the film acknowledges but never names. Clark himself had reached this conclusion long before the audience did, hence the mural. He had spent enough time in the space, close enough to his copy, to understand the difference. What he wrote on the wall was a warning to anyone who came after. Tables don't bleed. Captain Clark does. Question no one can answer. How does a copy exist before the original ever arrived? The earliest footage in the film shows the entity killing someone before Clark ever enters. This predates Clark's arrival entirely. Clark is still above, running his store wearing his ordinary clothes. The entity wearing Clark's appearance, specifically his costume from a children's pirate-themed commercial, attacked someone before Clark had ever set foot near the entrance. The copy appeared before the original. The timeline is impossible. and the film presents it without explanation. This is the problem the theory cannot fully solve, and which online communities have been working on since the film opened. If the entity is built from Clark's memories and psychological profile, how did it exist before Clark arrived? The space had to have acquired something from Clark before he entered. Through his proximity to the entrance, through years of being near the site, not knowing what was building itself beneath his showroom. One prominent argument holds that the costume itself is the key. Clark wore the pirate outfit for a brief commercial shoot, a few minutes in costume, yet the entity is defined by it. The theory holds that the space did not copy Clark the person. It copied Clark's self-image, specifically the version of himself he performed publicly, the persona he constructed for others. The pirate is not random. The pirate is how Clark wanted to be seen. Another argument holds that the costume matters because it was the first time Clark felt powerful. He wore it during a period when his life was unravelling, and in the commercial, people responded to him warmly. A brief window of feeling like a character rather than a failure. The space, reading his psychology, latched onto that. It built the most prominent version of Clark's self-image from the moment Clark felt most like himself. Whatever Captain Clark is, the film knows he's different. It left the clue on the wall. The question is left deliberately open. The director has said that all existing theories contain some truth. The mural is real. The X-rays are real. The physiological difference between Captain Clark and the standard entities is visible on screen, and it is not an accident. The film is asking viewers to notice. It is, in the words of one prominent analysis, telling you to look a little closer. The answer is in the details. The details are all there. The third theory asks a different question. Not what is in there, but what the space itself is doing. There is a phrase from an online movie discussion that has been quoted repeatedly. The space is essentially a brain, constantly shifting, remembering, reinforcing. This is the starting point for the third major theory, that the space is not a static location, not a dimension that simply exists, but a living cognitive system, one that learns, one that gets better at whatever it is attempting, the longer it has access to input. The evidence for this is in the progression of the entities. Early copies, the ones referenced in the original video series lore created when the space first made contact with people, are crude, rudimentary assemblages of material that vaguely approximate human shapes. They function, in Clark's own words, like furniture, inanimate in a sense. The space, in those early encounters, had not yet learned what it was working toward. Later copies are significantly more developed, more mobile, more purposeful, more anatomically detailed. The theory proposes that this progression is linear, that the space improves its copies with each new person who enters, and with each new set of memories it can process. It is not creating entities. It is refining a technique across countless iterations, using every person who has ever entered as material for an ongoing experiment in understanding human form. The implications extend to the question of why Captain Clark exists at all. If the space has been learning from proximity to Clark for years, absorbing his psychology, his appearance, his history, then by the time he finally steps through the door, it already has a sophisticated model to work from. It did not build Captain Clark after Clark arrived. It had been building him for years from the outside, through the electrical interference and the power outages. The store had been standing near the entrance for years. The space had years to study what was above. This connects to the most discussed new element the film introduced into the mythology. For the first time in this lore's history, the space appears to be distorting reality from inside, pushing outward rather than pulling inward. Clark's door begins experiencing strange failures, lights that dim without reason, equipment that loses power, objects in the showroom that behave in subtly wrong ways. The space beneath the building is not passive. It is active. It is reaching. In every prior iteration of this mythology, the dynamic was one-directional. Someone walked through a gap in reality and found themselves inside. The space did not reach out. It waited. The film changes this. The space is now capable of extending its influence into the world above. The boundary between inside and outside is permeable in both directions, and the space appears to be using that permeability deliberately. It is learning where the exits are. The most unsettling version of this theory holds that the space was always going to encounter Clark. The proximity of the entrance to his specific life, his store, his memories, his psychology, was not coincidental. The space, which the theory treats as a learning system with limited intention, had already identified Clark as suitable. His entry was not an accident. It was the conclusion of a long, slow process that had been running beneath his feet for years. It wasn't pulling people in at random. It had been studying Clark for years before he ever opened that door. The brain theory also offers the most disturbing interpretation of the ending. If the space learns and retains everything it processes, then nothing that enters ever truly leaves. The memories, the emotional profiles, the complete psychological architecture of every person who has ever stepped through, all of it persists inside. The space does not lose its data, it grows. And the people it has studied most thoroughly are the ones it keeps most clearly, long after the world above forgets them. The fourth theory is the most personal. It is about what happens when the space shows you who you are. Clark is introduced as a specific kind of man. Angry, contained, isolated. A failed relationship in his past. A life that did not become what he thought it would. He manages his store with meticulous precision, but there is something unresolved underneath. His therapist, Mary, reaches for it in their sessions. He deflects. He has been carrying something for a long time and has grown so accustomed to it that he can no longer feel its weight. Mary's observation about Clark, the one that drives the narrative to its turning point, is that he is too into himself, too occupied with his own interior world. He does not look outward. He looks inward, reflexively, always framing everything around the story he has decided to tell about his own life. This matters for the fourth theory because of what the space appears to do with it. It does not create a copy of Clark. It creates Clark's self-image. The thing wearing his face is not him. It is the version of himself he has refused to confront. Captain Clark does not behave like the other entities. The bearded man is passive. The red-draped figure is reactive. Captain Clark is purposeful, aggressive. He moves like someone who knows what he wants and is accustomed to taking it. The theory holds that this is Clark's unexamined self-image given form. All the anger he carries, the certainty he is the protagonist of every story, the belief in his own authority. Given bones and will, and a face exactly like his own. One of the most noticed details in the film is that Clark and Captain Clark coexisted for an extended period without direct confrontation. Evidence in the film suggests they were in proximity to each other for some time before things turned violent. The fan theory explains this with a single observation. Your mental state determines how the space treats you. Clark had accepted who he was. He was at peace with his self-image, and so his copy left him alone. The turning point arrives when Mary enters the space and begins talking to Clark. She challenges his self-perception directly. She names the things he has been carrying. She refuses to accept the story he has built around himself. And at almost precisely this moment, Captain Clark becomes hostile. The theory holds that this is not coincidental. When Clark's relationship with his own self-image became unstable, the entity embodying that self-image responded to the instability. This detail is visible in the film if you know to look for it. The transition from coexistence to aggression is tied to Clark's psychological state, not to any change in the space itself. The space did not decide to release the entity. Clark's inner conflict gave it permission to move. The most dangerous thing in any zone, according to this theory, is the version of yourself you have never been willing to examine. The moment he started to change, the copy turned on him. The copy couldn't change. There is a small, easily missed detail in the final act. When Captain Clark approaches the kitchen space, the red-draped entity runs. not from Clark. From Captain Clark specifically, the theory reads this as Clark's memory of his own past behaviour. He remembers that the person in his life was afraid of him. That memory lives in the entity built from her image. She runs from his worst self the way the real person once ran from his actual behaviour. What the space is doing in this reading is not generating monsters. It is running a diagnostic. It reads the person who opened the door, assembles their inner life into visible form, and then forces them to live with what it found. People who survive longest are the ones who can look at that without flinching. The ones who don't make it are the ones who cannot face what the space built from their own interior. This reframes the entire mythology, going back to the original image. The empty room with the yellow wallpaper was never just a location. It was always a mirror. The details would vary depending on who stepped through. The carpet pattern, the specific hue of the fluorescent light, the subtle wrongness in the proportions. All of it calibrated to produce the particular discomfort of the specific person standing there. A trap built from the contents of your own mind. The fifth theory starts at the end of the film, in a room that has no reason to exist where it does. The final sequence of the film is a montage of forgetting. Each character who entered the space is shown disappearing from the memory of the world above. Old photographs, empty chairs at tables, the traces that people leave, slowly becoming invisible. The sequence does not frame this as tragedy in the conventional sense. It frames it as a kind of transfer. They were forgotten by the world. They were remembered by the space. This phrase, remembered by the space, became the central fixation of the fifth theory. If the space builds from memory and retains everything it processes, then the people who entered and never returned are not gone in the conventional sense. They persist inside, not as themselves, as what the space built from the memories of everyone who knew them. They became part of the architecture. The space keeps everyone who enters, in the only way it knows how. The final shot draws significant attention. A room, a figure, a layout. Its proportions, the furniture, the angle of the light. Closely mirrors a room that appeared much earlier in the film, the room where a researcher interrogated Mary. The theory asks a quiet question. Whose memory built this room? The answer most fans arrived at was the researcher. He had met Mary, studied her, interacted with her long enough for the space to have acquired what it needed. If that is correct, then the figure in the final shot is not the real person. It is what the space built from someone else's memories of her. Her clothing, her posture, the specific way she occupied a space. The real person may have escaped. Or she may also be inside somewhere, herself becoming part of the architecture. The film does not resolve this. It places the image on screen and lets it sit. One of the most debated questions, did the real person make it out? Nobody agrees. The film doesn't say. The last piece of the fifth theory concerns a phone call. Clark, deep inside the space, makes a quiet call to someone outside. He says he has found the window. He says he is not coming back. The theory holds that this is the most important line in the film. It implies Clark found something the space did not want him to find, a way to understand it, a threshold, something that functioned for him as an exit, even if it was not a door. The interpretations of the window diverge significantly. Some fans read it as literal. Physical threshold Clark discovered after years of mapping the space. Others read it as psychological, a moment of acceptance the space had been engineering from the beginning. The window not as a location but a realization, a point at which the space had no further use for him, or at which he had no further use for the space. The film does not specify which. He found something in there that he could not find out here, and then he stopped looking for a way out. The director addressed the theories in a post-release interview and said something unusual. He said that all existing theories contain some element of truth. He also said that he was not the final authority on what the space means. He made it open-ended on purpose, in keeping with the open-source nature of the original mythology. The space belongs to the community that built it. The theories are not wrong because there is no single correct reading to be wrong about. This answer frustrated some fans and satisfied others. The ones it frustrated wanted resolution, a definitive explanation that would settle the debates. The ones it satisfied understood something the mythology had always implied: the space does not answer questions, it generates them. Every person who has spent time with it, through the films, through the discussions that have been running for years, has arrived at a slightly different version of what it is. That divergence is the point. What began as a single anonymous image of a dim, carpet-lined room has become a mythology with its own internal logic, its own ongoing debates, its own unanswered questions. The theories discussed here represent the most rigorous work the fan community has produced since the film opened. They do not agree with each other on every point, but they share a common assumption that the film was made to reward careful attention, and that careful attention does produce something. The space is still out there. The theories are still being written. Nothing about this has been resolved. The questions remain. What exactly is Captain Clark on a physical level, if not a still life? How did he exist before the original arrived? What does the window actually refer to? Is the figure at the end a copy, or is it something else? Is the space learning, or is it only reflecting? Does it have intention, or is it simply using the mechanism of whoever opened the door? These questions are active in online communities right now. The director's comment that all theories contain some truth is itself a kind of theory. It implies the space is not one thing, that its nature is composite, built from everything projected onto it since the concept first appeared online. The mythology absorbed all the interpretations. Every theory became part of what the space is, which means in a strange way that the fan community built the space it is now trying to understand. The concept began with a single anonymous post, an image of empty rooms and a caption describing the feeling of stepping outside reality. That post generated an entire ecosystem: videos, theories, films, ongoing discussions. All of it orbiting a feeling that the original image captured, that somewhere behind the walls there is a space that does not belong to the normal world, and that some people know how to slip into it accidentally. Something about that image stayed with people. Something about those rooms felt real. They are still arguing about why. The 5 theories explored here share one quality. They feel real in the way the best horror mythology always does. Not because they are provable, but because they describe something accurate about how the mind works, the way memory distorts the people we remember, the way we carry versions of ourselves we cannot acknowledge, the way unresolved feeling takes on weight and volume. The space is a horror about the mind, and the theories are accurate to that horror. The film is still in theatres. The discussions are still developing. New theories surface every day and older ones are revised as new details are noticed. The film appears to have been designed for this kind of sustained attention. It rewards rewatching. It rewards the long, patient look. It has rooms inside it that most viewers have not yet reached. These 5 theories will keep evolving. Something may be confirmed, something may be contradicted. But the core of the mythology, that the space is built from who you are, that your worst memories are the most dangerous things inside it, that something in there is learning, that will persist. It is too coherent, too supported by what is actually on screen to quietly disappear. If you would like to continue following these theories as they develop, leave a comment on the question that interests you most. The community is still mapping these rooms, still following details that have not been fully discussed yet. The more careful eyes inside the mythology, the clearer the picture becomes. That is, after all, how it started. Someone looked carefully at an empty room and saw something that wasn't supposed to be there.